Right. Well, because see, I will never forget my English teacher. She was my seventh grade English teacher, I believe, as well as my 12th grade English teacher. I didn't like her, but she told me, well, she told the whole class that being a Renaissance man was actually not a good thing. And I'll never forget that. Trying to do it all, not a good thing.
Wow.
What's up, everybody? My name is MichaelStephenson. Welcome to my YouTube channel. You are currently watching my art/entertainment industry series in which I talk mainly about TV/film with a little sprinkling of music, recording music, as well as talks on book publishing as well. Sometimes. So I ask that if this is your first time here on the channel, please go back and watch some of my previous videos. There's somewhere around like 30 videos that precede this that I call foundational videos. They are there because I'm trying to build up a particular lingo or language here on my channel so that in the future I will have developed a shorthand with you all, and I could just say something like the Avatar era or Trailer Parked or the Lost Effect, and you just know exactly what it is that I'm talking about, so that I don't have to potentially re-explain those ideas. I could just move along and hopefully make shorter videos. So tonight I wanted to talk about the writing. Now, the writing for Marvel specifically, of course. This is still my Marvel month, which is probably going to be like a month and a half, 2 months maybe. I don't know how long. But I was trying to get all of my Marvel films out at once since we only are going to really have one Marvel film this year, 2024, I do believe. So with that being said, I got to be honest with you all and tell you that I knew that I was going to have to make some kind of video based solely on and around the writing of current Marvel, current MCU films post-Endgame. But I didn't really know what I wanted to. Well, it wasn't even that I didn't know what I wanted to say. I could not figure out a specific angle that I wanted to address, wanted to talk about, and how to tackle this sort of. Honestly, it's a massive subject, and I've already talked about like smaller writing techniques and things, right? I've talked about through lines and how Marvel has used their through lines in the past, and I've talked a little bit about the characters and all that stuff. But I wanted to actually talk specifically about the writers and the writing, and so I couldn't figure out an angle until now, I believe, and I think that I have one. And let me be very clear about this. Is there going to be a certain level of hypocrisy from me in this video? Absolutely. Please go back to some of my early videos in which I talk specifically about the artist and about things like the calling, the ego of the artist, things of that nature, because I explore some of those topics that maybe artists and entertainers like myself, I consider myself to be one, I am a writer, that we might not necessarily want to always talk about, but there is a certain level of hypocrisy baked into us when we do our various arts and art forms. So with that being said, I wanted to sort of address this from the angle of, I guess, the sort of mediocrity of the writer-director currently in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, before I really dig in here, let me first start by saying this, is that I would absolutely love to be a writer-director. I consider myself one already, is that I think that, well, for starters, everybody in Hollywood kind of wants to be more than what they are. Like almost everybody in Hollywood. It's funny too, because you would think that, again, when you have famous people or when you have rich people, we're talking like A-list celebrities and stuff like that now, you would think that they would all be kind of satisfied with their job and with their position, especially if they get to the point to where they've made over $10 million in their career. It's like, why aren't you satisfied? But everybody in Hollywood pretty much wants to be something else. So actors oftentimes want to be directors. Directors consider themselves to be writers. Producers wish that they could be almost everything. They wish they could be directors as well as actors, and sometimes they are. And there's always a mix of everybody wants to be something other than what they are. And a lot of times they do seek out the hyphens, right? The hyphenate, like, oh, they're an actor director, or they are an actor producer, etc., etc. This is not only to enhance their brand, their money making power, but it also is because, let's keep it real, Hollywood and artists and entertainers in and of themselves, we are kind of control freaks. We want to see our visions played out on the big screen or the small screen, and we want to have a sort of purity, so to speak, of our arts or our entertainment. And so we are currently in the era of the big time era of the writer director. You see them not just in Marvel MCU, but you kind of see them across all, across all forms of the visual art, whether it's film or television, or even shorts, or web stuff. You see it everywhere, to where a writer feels as if they need to direct their own stuff. And as I said, I'm not mad at it. I think that I would love to do it. I want to do it, and I've made a promise to myself that I will do it. However, with that in mind, there is a certain level of, how do I word this? Is a certain proficiency level that if you're going to try to do more than one thing, you need to be able to reach that proficiency level. And I'm not saying that the writer directors specifically in the MCU are not proficient at what they do, but I am saying that their talents may be getting spread a little too thin in some areas, and that area seems to very much so be writing. So again, in the early days of Marvel, we did have writer directors there as well. But you look at Iron Man, and Iron Man was famously directed by and partially written by Jon Favreau. Now, he was the same guy behind, well, maybe I shouldn't mention that movie's name. Now that I think about it, on a Marvel video, he was the same writer director behind some sort of like some indie comedies back in the 90s. He came up along with Vince Vaughn. I believe that they were friends at the time, and so he was doing a lot of the filming, and they came up together. He put Vince in one of his first ever films, and so he built his career. He earned his stripes, paid his dues, etc., to where he was finally given the reins for Iron Man. And in a lot of the documentaries and a lot of behind the scenes stuff about the original Iron Man film, it is routinely said that they were sort of a ragtag group of actors, directors, and a few writers that they really kind of didn't know what they were doing. They were sort of freestyling, hoping that what they did would work ultimately. So John, he had a background in acting first, and then he turned writer director to make his big break in Hollywood. So he had some more than enough experience with doing it. And for those of you who don't know, the guy that I'm talking about, he also plays the character Smiley in the Iron Man films, and of course the Spider-Man and Avengers films as well. So he stayed with the MCU throughout the entire thing, and he's a producer on some of the some of the Avengers films, including in Endgame and Infinity War. So he was on the first Iron Man. He, along with actor Justin Theroux, who I don't know if you guys know. I know some of you don't really stay up with like gossip or celebrity news, but he was previously engaged to Jennifer Aniston. That's sort of his biggest thing. He was also the lead in that show, that HBO show, The Leftovers. And I guess his other biggest claim to fame is that he was in one of the Charlie's Angels remake movies, the early 2000s version, not that Kristen Stewart version of recent history. but the early 2000s version with Drew Barrymore, Lucy Liu, and Carmen Diaz, he played, I want to say, a character called the Thin Man. That's what I want to say, but I don't know if that was really his name. In one of those movies, I want to say it was Charlie's Angels Full Throttle. It was him, Jon Favreau, and then I believe one other writer. And they kind of didn't know what the heck they were doing, as I said before. Kevin Feige, he was giving his input where he could, of course. But one of the key things that was said, that is always said, is that Tony Stark, or Robert Downey Jr. in this case, he would sort of read the script, and similar to what Johnny Depp sort of does, especially when he's doing the Pirates of the Caribbean films, is that he would read the script and he would sort of get a general idea of where the scene wanted to go, and he would basically throw the script away. He would rewrite his lines. Sometimes he would do a lot of improvisation. He was somewhat almost like a a fourth or even fifth writer, because they might have had two other writers outside of John and Justin. But he was almost sort of another writer, in that he wrote a lot of his own dialogue. He sort of improvised it and just was in the moment. And luckily it worked, of course, but usually that's not how you go along with it, because there's so many things that could go wrong and that could go bad. So from then on, yes, they still sort of had a few writer-directors here and there in the first couple of phases of the Marvel films, but what they were sort of trying to do is that they started on a lot of the sequels of the original films to hire legitimate, well, not legitimate, that's not the right word that I really want to say. They started to hire people who were professional writers, and that's pretty much all that they did. That was their focus. Their focus was not torn between two things. So the biggest or the biggest advantage that they had was that of getting the writing team of Marcus and McFeely. Those are their last names. I want to say it's Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely, but don't quote me on that. Of course, you guys can look it up. They were a writing duo, a writing partnership, which I want to say they actually met in college. And both of them have a master's in film arts, I believe, with their focus being that of screenwriting. So they are highly schooled, highly educated, and they know the tiniest intricacies of actually putting a story together and truly building things from a granular level up into something that is magnificent. I think that they, and writers like them, writers of their caliber, writers who have slaved over writing, over just composition of putting scenes together and things of that nature in a non-visual way, just putting the stuff on a paper, as opposed to directors who, whether they've gone to film school or not, directors still very much so think visually. All of the things that they do, they try to focus in on the visuals and shot composition, and how to tell this story with in this way and that way, etc., etc. The director has a lot of other things going on. The writer generally just is supposed to have the writing, like the writing is just, it blocks out any and everything else. The world disappears as the writer is writing. I think that the sort of loss of them, because I don't think that they've written anything for Marvel since Endgame, I think that actually has played a huge role in the MCU, the current MCU that we have. Now, again, don't get me wrong. Yes, there oftentimes, and you guys say it all the time as well, is that there oftentimes seems to be, or there oftentimes is, the best thing to do is to get people to write these films that actually legitimately love the characters. And while that is definitely a good and even a great thing to do, just because they love the characters doesn't always mean and doesn't always equate to or translate to good narrative structure or good storytelling. And I think that that's where writers like Marcus and McFeely come in, is that their acumen for building a story it seemed as if it was superior in many ways to some of the other writers that we saw within the MCU, and especially to a lot of the writers that we see now in the MCU, unfortunately. And again, as I said, I'm not necessarily putting the writer directors down. I'm just saying that it feels like their talents don't necessarily lie within the realm of writing. So when you go back and you consider Marcus and McFeely, what you're looking at is a resume just within the MCU that is superb. First off, out of the top 5 films that usually almost everybody lists when you look at all of the MCU films, and in some ways you can kind of take Spider-Man No Way Home out of it just because it's such a big nostalgia bait kind of film that it has a whole lot of flaws, but a lot of those flaws are overlooked because nostalgia. Take Spider-Man No Way Home out of it, and if you look across the majority of all of the MCU films, most people, and I'm thinking maybe somewhere around 80 or 90%, most people in their top 5 probably have some combination of, and this is in no way, shape, or order, they probably have some combination of Captain America Winter Soldier, Captain America Civil War, Endgame, and Infinity War, Avengers Endgame and Avengers Infinity War. And then, of course, that 5th film is probably very much so sort of left up to debate. I think that 5th film oftentimes is just based on or around whatever character or character team that you really, really love the most. Sometimes you can probably throw in the original Avengers just because it was the original. Some people might throw in Thor Ragnarok. I'm sure if you're talking to a lot of Black people, they'll throw in Black Panther. If you're talking to a lot of women, they might throw in Black Widow or Captain Marvel. It just depends on who you're talking to. So you're talking top 5 or at the very least top 6. Those 4 films are usually in the top in some type of order. It should be no shock or surprise that all 4 of those films are written by Marcus and McFeely. They've written some of the best films within the MCU, and I think it's in some ways a testament to how good writing can be when the hire are focused on solely one thing, and that is just delivering a narrative that on paper it works incredibly well. And they're not having to focus on all of these other stresses that come when you are directing a film as well. Basically, I always go back to the example of Henry Ford, right? So Henry Ford did not invent the car. He didn't invent the automobile, but he did invent the process by which we can mass manufacture the automobile, the car, by creating the assembly line and making it so that one person can focus in on just doing one specific task. That basically allowed for a person to, in some ways, master doing that one specific thing, just over and over and over again. Whether it was screwing bolts onto a car door, or I don't know, building pistons, or banging out the rim of a tire, whatever it was, they were able to focus in on doing that and that alone. So much so that they became masters in doing that particular thing. What I'm seeing with, honestly, the MCU, but really all of Hollywood, in my opinion, is that we may have just a few too many writer-directors at this point. Now, again, I get it and I understand that sometimes previously to this era that we're in now, we got a lot of directors that just sort of felt like hired guns, so to speak, where they came in, it was a script, they were handed a script and told by a studio, here, direct this script for us. We just needed somebody to come in and direct it. And so they would come in and they would read the script, and basically the script was a vision of what the screenwriter wanted to do and wanted to see and how they wanted the story to play out. So it could be very limiting for a director to come in and have the story already built and filled in all of the it is in some ways it can sometimes feel like playing with a coloring book where all of the pictures are already colored in, or at least half of the pictures are colored in some way, shape, or form. Saying, for instance, that almost all of the pictures have at least one thing colored in the color red, and then the director comes in and maybe says like, yeah, I kind of hate the color red. I would not have used red at all on any of these pictures. So I understand the desire for directors to always want to be the writers on their own stuff, but as I said, I'm not sure that all of the directors that we have out there, especially in the MCU, but really in a wider berth in all of Hollywood, I'm not sure that all of them are really superb in writing. They might be efficient in doing it, but they're not proficient. They are not on the top level, the top tier kind of writers. I know y'all gonna get tired of this. I mentioned this in another video that y'all gonna get tired of this, of me constantly mentioning Dune. But like I said, there's a reason why I picked Dune Part 1 as the epitome of everything wrong, almost everything wrong with Hollywood right now. I think one of the things is that we have seen with the Dune movies, I haven't seen Dune Part 2 yet, so I can't say for sure. But I think one of the things that sort of suffers there is that Denis is not that great of a writer. I just don't think that he really is. I think that stylistically he is very visual, and I even think I want to say I read I will confirm this in another video when I actually do a Dune Part 2 review. But I think he said recently that he doesn't really mess with a lot of like words and specifically dialogue. He doesn't think that dialogue makes a movie, which is just bonkers. It's the most ridiculous thing ever. But I don't think that he's a strong enough writer to have written the screenplay for Dune. I'm sorry, but I don't. And I think that that's one of the reasons why Part 1 suffered, because it was just not good writing at all. And I'm looking at some of the MCU movies, and I'm seeing, in my opinion, some of the same exact things. Is that the writing, it almost feels like in most of the films, the writing almost gets there. It almost reaches, there's a whole lot of scripts that seem almost really good, but they're missing something. They're constantly missing one or two or even three pieces that, oh man, if they just had this one thing in there, it would have pushed them over the top. And it's almost never a technical thing, right? Granted, in Thor: Love and Thunder, okay, it's a technical thing. The whole floating head thing that they did with the kid, bad CGI, that was a technical thing. But for the most part, the writing, it never feels quite strong enough to push the movies over that hill and to get them into the promised land to where it's like, okay, this is a really good movie, or this is a great movie. It fails in some ways. It always seems to fall just short of that. And I think that getting writers that are really, like I said, I hate saying true writers that are just focused solely on writing, I think that could clear up a lot of the stuff. Now, listen, don't get me wrong. I know that on most of these projects, the writer-director is given usually a second writer to help them along. But why do I feel like that second writer is usually just there in some ways to serve, to sort of serve up facts and things that the directors might not know about the character, right? So I do know that the Marvels, the film was written, directed by the same woman behind the Candyman remake from a few years back, and I do believe that she had a co-writer on the film, which I don't know if she had ever worked with that co-writer before. I'm going to say that she probably didn't. It felt more than anything like it was a David S. Goyer kind of situation. And I'm sure most of you know, but for those of you who don't know, David S. Goyer was sort of the Warner Brothers mandated writer on not just the Christopher and Jonathan Nolan written Dark Knight series, but on a lot of the DC comic book series for a while because he was sort of a comic book guy. He knew a lot of information that the Nolans themselves would not have known because they weren't as immersed in comic book culture as he was. And so he was put on there, and he has like he has a written by credit in some of them, and sometimes he just has a story by credit. So it feels like the writers on a lot of these writer director projects in the MCU kind of fit that bill, to where they're filling in some of the blanks just on characters, and like, oh yeah, this character has this ability, this character is related to this character, in the comics we once did this as a storyline, etc., etc. But it weirdly enough doesn't feel like they themselves have the gravitas to where they can come in and say, yeah, no, this is a better thing to do, narratively. This is a better thing to do with this particular story. This is a better thing to do for these characters, etc., etc. It just doesn't feel like they have that kind of gravitas, to where Marcus and McFeely, well, I don't know what the writing process was like, but again, when you have two men who are, I think they were at that point, kind of middle-aged men, late 30s, maybe 40s, and both of them have masters in writing. They have masters in writing. So they've gone to school for quite a while to learn how to write, and especially to learn how to write screenplays. I think that can bring a certain level of like, you know what, we can sort of sit back and relax, because we know that these people have, they have mastered that one trade. They're not a jack of all trades like the director is trying to be. They've mastered that one trade, so we can sit back and just watch them work and be in a collective, more collaborative environment, for that. We don't have to put the stress on our directors. And again, with them writing the two Captain America films, as well as those two Avenger films, that to me probably took some of the stress that the Russo brothers would potentially have been feeling off of them, so that they could just direct as opposed to write and direct. Now, again, as I said, this is not to say that they didn't have input, that the directors, the Russo brothers, didn't have input on the scripts that they would ultimately be shooting. But it is to say that they were okay with backing away and letting somebody else deal with the minutia and deal with the granular problems that can arise from writing. And I just don't feel like all of the writer directors that we have in Hollywood are able to effectively do that in a way that is conducive to creating good movies, or even great movies. Denis Villeneuve is not the only writer director who, in my opinions, falls short in the writing category here. James Cameron also, on the Avatar films, I feel like, listen, if he just did a story by, and then he stepped away and said, okay, you other writers, you guys take the reins completely, and I'm not even going to have a screenplay by credit. You guys just write it, and then I'll film it. I think that the movies, the Avatar films, would probably be far better and more effective. Yeah, I just, I wish that the writing wasn't suffering because of the directing. And that's kind of how it feels. That the writing in some ways is suffering because the director has to think about so many different aspects of the film all at once, that they can't put their everything into just writing the screenplay. Because even as they're writing it, they get hired to write and direct. So everybody from, I think her name is Nia DaCosta, who wrote the Marvels, whether it's the Marvels or maybe it was the Eternals. Who did the Eternals? Y'all remember? I remember because I think Nia was supposed to do one, and then she ended up doing the other one, but I can't remember which one it was now that I think about it. Oh no, I do know. It was Chloe. It was Chloe Zhao, I believe. The woman who was behind that Nomadland. She did the Eternals, and she again wrote and directed, I believe, the Eternals. It turned out terribly. It turned out terribly. Taika Waititi, he did Thor Ragnarok, which was great, but then he did Thor Love and Thunder, which was like, you're batting 50% here, because it's like one was good, but then the other one, it had way too much humor of the same caliber in it. James Gunn, listen, we might have to have a whole Guardians of the Galaxy video, because I liked the first Guardians, but the second one to me suffered from the whole empty world, quiet Earth syndrome that I covered in another video. And then the third one, it was interesting. It had its moments, but I feel in many ways like it was just, it just felt overly long. So, he's sort of a hit and miss kind of a guy too. The Black Panther films, Ryan Coogler, he also has a co-writer, and I want to say, listen, I don't know, I want to say that the co-writer is a Marvel person, because I don't know, Wakanda Forever. Well, I didn't like Black Panther to begin with. I didn't like the first Black Panther to begin with, so you take that for how you want it. But and I guess before I end this video, I should mention this as well, is that I understand why Marvel as a company might feel as if it is okay for them to potentially get rid of just strict writers and have almost always the writer-director combo working on the films, mainly because of the fact that, again, since most of the films recycle their plots and they recycle their structures anyway, it could easily feel like, look, maybe this writer-director, maybe he or she isn't, or they, because we've had a team of writer-director, I think they worked on the first Captain Marvel, right? Maybe they are, and this is what I'm thinking that Marvel might be thinking, that, oh yeah, maybe these people are not that strong of writers, but they're great directors. And because we already have a structure, we already know what we want to do with the plot of each movie, where the heroes related to the villain, and this happens, etc., etc. We can slot them into almost any movie, and so long as they keep in the structure, that will essentially cover their inadequacies or any sort of areas where they need to improve as a writer. I think that may be something that Marvel is thinking, because I just don't think that all of these writer-directors are that good of writers. They make good directors, but writers are a different animal. They're a different thing. They're a different breed. And I just don't see them. I really just don't see them meshing as well as they used to. So I'm going to end the video there. What do you guys think? We've seen on almost all of these movies, almost all of them are writer-director made or created, to where, though both of those roles are filled by one person. Is that somehow, do you think that somehow is affecting the films, affecting the film quality? Is it making the films better? Is it making the films worse? I don't know. Like, what do you guys think? Let me know in, the comments and whatnot, because I'm really interested in what you guys would think about this. So, and again, it's not like they didn't have it pre-Endgame. It's just that, again, it feels like they have it almost all the time, nonstop now. So I don't know. I don't have a. Hey everybody. So while I don't have an official sign off yet, I guess I should do the whole please like, comment, share, and if you so desire and you want to see more, subscribe. But more importantly, I will ask that you please go and purchase one of my books. They are mostly ebooks, and pretty much they are all under $10. See if any of my work is actually any good, if it lives up to any of the things that I'm talking about here on my channel, specifically with the entertainment industry videos. So please go purchase my books. All of my links are down below. Thank you.